What happens when a man everyone already dismissed hears his daughter-in-law celebrate his supposed end as a financial win? When the doctor said I had 3 days left, she smiled and whispered that my money would finally be theirs. What she didn't know was that I had already prepared for this exact moment. The hospital room smelled like disinfectant and something else I couldn't name. Something final. Dr. Howard Mills stood at the foot of my bed with a clipboard in his hands and that look on his face, the one doctors practice in medical school, somewhere between sympathy and professional detachment. He was a tall man with gray hair that somehow made him look distinguished instead of old. I guess that's the difference between being a doctor and being a patient. "Porter," he said, and I noticed he didn't call me Mr. Kellor anymore. That was the first sign. When they stop using your last name, you know you've crossed some invisible line from person to case study. I want to be direct with you. The tests came back, and the results are not what we hoped for. I didn't say anything, just watched him. 30 years in security taught me that silence makes people uncomfortable enough to fill it with truth. The cancer has progressed rapidly, more rapidly than we anticipated. He paused, and I could see him choosing his next words carefully. Given the current state of your liver and the spread to your lymphatic system, we're looking at a very limited time frame. How limited? My voice came out steady, calmer than I felt. 72 hours, perhaps 96 if we're fortunate. I'm sorry, Porter. We can make you comfortable, but there's nothing more we can do medically. The room went very still. I heard the ventilation system humming, heard footsteps in the hallway outside, heard my own heartbeat in my ears, steady and strong despite what the doctor had just told me. I understand, I said. Dr. Mills looked relieved. Nobody wants a scene. He said something about palliative care and pain management, but I wasn't really listening anymore. I was watching the door because I knew who would walk through it next. Lena. She came in exactly 90 seconds after the doctor left. I counted. She was wearing a navy dress that probably cost more than most people's monthly rent, and her blonde hair was pulled back in a way that made her look younger than 34. Makeup, perfect. Nails, perfect. Everything about Lena was always perfect on the surface. "Oh, Porter." She rushed to my bedside and took my hand. Her fingers were cold. They were always cold. The doctor told us. Evan and I are devastated. Just devastated. I looked at her face, watched the performance. She was good at this. Years of practice, I suppose. The concerned daughter-in-law, the grieving family member. But I'd spent 3 decades reading people's faces in security footage, in interrogation rooms, in moments when they thought nobody was watching. I knew what real emotion looked like. This wasn't it. "Where's Evan?" I asked. "He's making some calls, arrangements." She squeezed my hand. "You know how he gets when he's upset? He needs to stay busy." Arrangements. Right. I wondered what kind of arrangements Evan was making, a planning office or a lawyer's office. "I need to rest," I told her. Of course you do." She leaned down, and for a moment I thought she might kiss my forehead. Instead, she moved close to my ear, close enough that her breath was warm against my skin, close enough that nobody else could hear. 3 days, she whispered. Her voice was different now, lighter, almost excited. And then everything finally belongs to us. No more waiting, no more pretending. She pulled back and smiled. A real smile this time. Not the performance smile, the one she saved for when she thought she'd won. "Rest now," she said in her public voice again. "We'll be right outside if you need anything." The door closed behind her with a soft click, the kind of sound that seems insignificant until you realize it's the sound of someone walking away from what they think is a finished game. I lay there in the hospital bed and stared at the ceiling tiles, counted them. 36 visible from where I was positioned. The fluorescent lights created a grid pattern across them, and I followed the lines with my eyes while my mind worked through everything that had just happened. 3 days left. She'd actually said it out loud. After all these months of subtle hints and careful positioning, she'd finally dropped the mask completely. She thought I was too weak to matter, too close to the end to do anything about it. I let my eyes close, not because I was tired, because I needed to think without her face in my memory, needed to focus on the next 72 hours and what they would actually bring. Dr. Mills was a good doctor, competent, professional, but he'd made one critical error in his diagnosis. He'd assumed that elevated liver enzymes and suspicious lymph node activity meant terminal cancer. He'd looked at the test results and seen exactly what he expected to see in a 61-year-old former security officer with a history of high-stress work and poor dietary habits. He hadn't considered that those same symptoms could be caused by something else entirely, something temporary, something reversible. But then again, He'd never seen my actual medical records from Dr. Patricia Emerson, the specialist I'd been seeing privately for the past 6 months. The one whose office wasn't in this hospital, the one whose treatment plan didn't appear anywhere in the system Dr. Mills had access to. I opened my eyes again, looked at the IV line running into my arm, the saline drip that was keeping me hydrated, the morphine dispenser that I hadn't touched once despite the nurse's encouragement. I needed my mind clear, needed to stay sharp for what came next. My phone was on the rolling table next to the bed. I reached for it slowly, making the movement look painful, making it look like even this small effort cost me something. I'd been practicing that for weeks now. The shuffle, the wince, the careful way of moving that made people assume you were falling apart. One new message. From Ruth Calder, my attorney. Confirmed. Ready when you are. I deleted the message and put the phone down. Let my hand tremble slightly as I did it. Just enough for the camera in the corner of the room to capture. Just enough to add to the narrative. Outside my door, I could hear Lena's voice. She was on her phone now, talking to someone. I couldn't make out the words, but I recognized the tone. It was the same tone she used when she was shopping for something expensive. That mixture of excitement and entitlement. 3 days left, she'd said. She was right about the timeline, just not about the outcome. I closed my eyes again and waited for visiting hours to end. The thing about becoming invisible is that it doesn't happen all at once. It's a gradual process, a series of small moments where people start looking through you instead of at you, where your opinions become suggestions, where your presence in a room becomes optional. For me, it started about 18 months ago, right after I retired from Sentinel Security Services. 30 years of managing facility protection, running background checks, coordinating response teams, and then one day, you're 60 years old, and someone younger decides you've earned your rest whether you want it or not. Evan was 34 then, still living in the apartment I'd been helping him pay for since his divorce, still working the same entry-level consulting job he'd had for 6 years, still waiting for his big break that never seemed to come. Then he met Lena. She was different from his ex-wife, polished, ambitious. She had a business degree from a good school and a job at a marketing firm downtown. She wore expensive perfume and knew which fork to use at fancy restaurants. Evan looked at her like she was something rare and precious, like he couldn't believe his luck. I should have seen it then. Should have recognized the way she calculated everything, the way her eyes would flick around a room, assessing value, the way she asked casual questions about property and investments and inheritance laws, but I was too busy being relieved that my son had found someone who seemed to have their life together. Too busy hoping this meant he'd finally stand on his own 2 feet. They got married 4 months after they met. Small ceremony. Lena said she wanted something intimate, just close family. Looking back, I think she just wanted it done quickly. Wanted the paperwork signed before anyone could raise questions. I gave them $20,000 for a down payment on a house. Lena picked it out. 3-bedroom colonial in a neighborhood where people drove cars that cost more than I'd made in my best year. She said it was an investment. Said property values in that area were only going up. Evan was happy. That's what I kept telling myself. He'd smile when Lena talked about their future, nod when she explained her 5-year plan, agree when she suggested he should ask me for help with the mortgage when money got tight, which it always did. The first time I had dinner at their new house, Lena made salmon. She was a good cook, everything perfectly plated, cloth napkins, wine that came from a bottle with a cork instead of a screw top. This is wonderful, I told her, and I meant it. The food was excellent. Evan's been telling me about your career, she said, cutting her fish into precise pieces. 30 years in security. That must have been fascinating. It had its moments. Did you ever think about writing a book? I imagine you have incredible stories. I smiled. Most of them involve watching monitors and filing reports. Not exactly bestseller material. Still. She took a sip of wine. All that experience. All that knowledge. It seems like such a waste to just let it disappear. Evan nodded. Dad knows everyone in the industry. He could consult, make connections for people. I'm retired, I said gently. That's kind of the point. Lena's smile didn't change, but something flickered in her eyes. Just for a second. Of course. You've earned your rest. It's just that Evan and I were talking about opportunities, and we thought maybe you'd want to stay involved. Stay relevant. Stay relevant. That was the first time she said it, but it wouldn't be the last. Over the next year, it became a recurring theme, usually wrapped in concern, always delivered with a smile. Have you thought about updating your technology, Porter? Everything's digital now. You don't want to become obsolete. Maybe you should take a class, learn about social media. It's important to stay relevant. Evan was reading an article about cognitive decline in retirees. It happens when people stop challenging themselves, when they stop staying relevant. She never said I was old, never said I was useless. She just planted the seeds and let them grow. Let other people draw their own conclusions. And Evan went along with it. Not maliciously, not even consciously, I think. He just gradually started treating me the way Lena did, asking fewer questions, including me in fewer decisions, talking about me in the third person when I was right there in the room. Dad's not really into technology. Dad doesn't understand how things work now. Dad's from a different generation. Each comment was small, insignificant on its own, but they accumulated like water damage in a wall. Slow, persistent, structural. There was the time Evan called to ask my advice about a work situation, a conflict with his manager. I'd started to explain how I'd handled similar issues in security work, the importance of documentation, of keeping emotions separate from facts, of building your case before you presented it. I was mid-sentence when I heard Lena's voice in the background. "Is that your dad? Ask him about Sunday dinner." Evan had interrupted me. "Hey, Dad, Lena wants to know if you can come to dinner Sunday." "Sure," I'd said, "but about your work situation." "Oh, that's okay. Lena thinks I should just let it go, not make waves. You know how it is." He'd hung up a minute later, never asked what I thought he should do, never finished the conversation we'd started. That became the pattern. I'd offer advice, and Lena would offer different advice, and Evan would always choose hers. Not because it was better, just because it was easier. Because disagreeing with me had no consequences, but disagreeing with Lena meant tension at home. I watched him shrink over those months. Watched him defer more and more decisions to her. Watched him stop having opinions of his own. At first, I thought maybe I was being paranoid. Overprotective. Maybe this was just what modern marriage looked like, and I was too old-fashioned to understand it. But then came the incident with Evan's car. He'd been driving the same Honda Civic for 8 years. It ran fine. Low mileage, well-maintained, paid off. But one Saturday, Lena decided they needed to upgrade, said the Civic made them look poor, said image mattered in her industry. Evan called me that afternoon. "Dad, we're getting a new car. Well, new to us, a BMW. 3 years old, but it looks brand new." "How much?" $32,000. I'd gone quiet. $32,000 for a car when they were already stretched thin on their mortgage, when Evan was still paying down credit card debt from the wedding. "That seems steep," I'd said carefully. Lena found a great financing deal, only 6% interest. Only 6%. On a depreciating asset, for people who couldn't afford to buy it outright. "What do you think?" he'd asked. I should have been honest. Should have told him it was a terrible financial decision, that the car would lose value faster than they could pay down the loan, that they'd be underwater on it for years. But I didn't, because I'd learned by then that honesty just made Lena position me as the obstacle, the old man who didn't understand modern life, the one holding Evan back. "If you think it's right for you," I'd said. 3 months later, they'd asked me for $3,000 to cover an unexpected tax bill. They'd miscalculated something, made an error. I'd given them the money, didn't ask about the BMW payment, didn't point out that the tax bill probably wouldn't have been a crisis if they'd kept the Honda. Just wrote the check and watched Lena's smile when Evan told her I'd helped out. That smile told me everything I needed to know. She'd expected the money, had planned on it, had structured their finances in a way that required my intervention. And every time I helped, I made Evan weaker, made him more dependent, made it easier for Lena to position herself as the only person who really understood their situation. The hospital nurse interrupted my memories by coming in to check my vitals. She was young, maybe 25, pretty smile. Name tag said Jennifer. "How are you feeling, Mr. Kellor?" She wrapped the pressure cuff around my arm. "Tired," I said, which was true, just not in the way she meant. "That's normal. Your body's working hard." She watched the monitor. "Your readings actually look good. That's encouraging." "Is it?" She caught something in my tone, looked at me more carefully. "You have family here?" "My son and his wife." "That's good. Nobody should be alone at a time like this." She finished with the cuff and made a note on her tablet. "They seem very devoted. Your daughter-in-law was just out in the hall telling everyone how much you mean to them." I didn't respond. Jennifer must have taken my silence for emotion because she patted my hand. "You raised a good son? That's something to be proud of." After she left, I thought about that, about whether I'd raised a good son. Evan wasn't cruel, wasn't deliberately hurtful. He just lacked something fundamental. some core of self that would let him stand up and say no, that would let him see what was happening and call it what it was. He was weak, and weakness, I'd learned over 30 years in security, was the most dangerous vulnerability of all. Because weak people don't just fail themselves, they fail everyone who depends on them. I thought about his childhood, about the divorce when he was 12. His mother had moved to Arizona with her new boyfriend, sent birthday cards for a few years, then stopped even that. Evan had needed stability then, had needed to know someone would stay, so I'd stayed. Worked extra shifts, made sure he had what he needed, went to his school events even when I was exhausted. Tried to be both parents because one had left and the other was busy trying to keep a roof over their heads. Maybe I'd done too much. Maybe I'd protected him from consequences until he didn't know how to face them anymore. Maybe every time I'd solved a problem for him, I'd taught him that problems were someone else's responsibility. Or maybe Lena had just been good at finding weakness and exploiting it. Maybe she'd seen in Evan exactly what she needed, someone who would follow instead of lead, someone who would agree instead of argue, someone who would let her make the decisions as long as he didn't have to face the stress of making them himself. Either way, the result was the same. My son was 36, and his wife was already planning what came next before I was even out of the picture. My phone buzzed. I checked it carefully, making sure my hands looked unsteady. Mark Velasquez. Need anything? I typed back slowly. All good. Stand by. Mark had worked with me at Sentinel for 12 years, started as a junior analyst and worked his way up to field operations coordinator. He was smart, loyal, and most importantly, he knew how to keep his mouth shut. When I first started planning this, back when I realized what Lena was really after, Mark was the first person I called. He didn't ask why, didn't question the requests, just nodded and started making things happen. That's the thing about real trust. You build it over years. You test it in small ways before you need it for something big, and when the time comes, you don't have to explain. You just act. I remembered the day I'd called him. 6 months ago, early morning. I'd spent the night thinking about Lena's comment about the senior living facility, about how she'd calculated the difference between what my apartment would sell for and what the facility would cost. I need help with something, I'd told Mark. Something unusual. Okay. I can't explain everything right now, but I need someone I can trust, someone who won't ask questions. There'd been a long pause. Then, what do you need? That was Mark. No drama, no demands for explanation. Just, what do you need? Research on trust attorneys, someone who specializes in protective estate planning, someone who's seen family manipulation before and knows how to counter it. When do you need this? Soon. I'll have names for you by tomorrow. He'd delivered. 3 attorneys, complete with background checks, case histories, client reviews. All of them vetted, all of them capable. I'd chosen Ruth Calder, 23 years of experience, specialized in elder law, had a reputation for being thorough and uncompromising. Mark had also helped me set up the encrypted messaging system, had taught me how to document conversations without leaving obvious traces, had been the one to suggest Dr. Emerson when I'd explained what I was considering. You're really going to do this? He'd asked when I'd laid out the plan. Yes. It's risky. So is doing nothing. He'd nodded. Okay, then let's do it right. That was 3 months ago. 3 months of careful preparation, of medication protocols and legal documentation and evidence gathering, 3 months of playing the part of a declining old man while I built the cage that would trap Lena. I heard voices in the hallway again. Lena and someone else, a woman I didn't recognize. They were talking about meal trains and flower arrangements, end-of-life logistics, the practical details that follow serious news. 3 days, Lena was saying. The doctor said 3 days, so we're thinking Saturday for the service. Give people time to make arrangements. That's so fast, the other woman said. I know. But Porter wouldn't want a big fuss. He always said he wanted something simple, small, just close friends. I almost laughed. Porter wouldn't want a big fuss, like she had any idea what I wanted, like we'd ever had a conversation about my preferences for anything that mattered. But that was Lena's gift. She could create history out of thin air, could tell stories about conversations that never happened and make people believe them, could position herself as the devoted daughter-in-law who understood me better than anyone. How's Evan holding up? The other woman asked. He's devastated. This is his father, his only parent. Lena's voice dropped. I'm trying to be strong for him, but it's hard. Porter's been such an important part of our lives. Such an important part of our lives. The apartment I'd lived in for 15 years that she wanted to sell. The money I'd saved for 36 years that she wanted to spend. the presents at family dinners that she tolerated because it would look bad not to. That's what I'd been reduced to, an asset to be liquidated, a problem to be solved, an inconvenience with an approaching expiration date. "You're doing an amazing job," the other woman said. "Porter's lucky to have you." "I just want to honor him. Make sure his final days are peaceful." Peaceful. Right. The voices faded as they moved down the hallway. I lay there in the hospital bed and thought about all the small moments that had led here. The gradual erosion of respect. The casual cruelties disguised as concern. The way Lena had systematically positioned me as obsolete. And for 18 months, I'd let her. Played the part of the declining old man who was grateful for her attention, who appreciated her concern, who nodded along when she explained how the world worked now. Because the thing about being underestimated is that it gives you room to move. People stop watching you carefully, stop questioning your actions, stop considering you a threat, and that's when you can actually get things done. Tomorrow at 2 p.m., Lena would learn what happens when you mistake patience for weakness, when you confuse silence for acceptance, when you assume that someone who's survived 61 years has nothing left to teach you about consequences. I closed my eyes and smiled. The ICU waiting area was empty when they finally let me sit up for a few hours. Dr. Mills said gentle movement might help with circulation. Lena thought it was a bad idea, said I should stay in bed and conserve my strength. But the doctor overruled her, and I could see the tiny flash of annoyance in her eyes before she covered it with concern. Evan wheeled me down in a chair. The hallway was long and sterile, fluorescent lights overhead, that particular squeak that hospital wheels make on linoleum. He didn't say much, just pushed and walked and avoided looking directly at me. "You okay, son?" I asked. Yeah, I'm okay. But his voice said otherwise. It's a lot. "I know. Lena's handling everything, all the planning. She's been amazing." "She's very organized," I agreed. We reached the waiting area, and he parked me near the window. Outside, the parking lot stretched away in neat rows. I could see Lena's car, a white Audi she'd bought 6 months ago. Used, but you couldn't tell unless you looked at the odometer. She was good at making things look better than they were. "I'm going to grab coffee," Evan said. "You want anything?" "I'm fine." He left quickly, almost running. That was Evan's way. When things got uncomfortable, he found reasons to be somewhere else. I sat there alone and looked at my reflection in the window glass. 61 years old, gray hair, face that had seen better decades. But my eyes were clear, alert. Not the eyes of a man who was checking out in 72 hours. My phone was in my lap. I waited until I was sure Evan was gone, then pulled it out and opened the encrypted messaging app Mark had set up for me 3 months ago. "Status?" I typed. Mark's response came immediately. "Attorney confirmed all documents. Bank verified account structures, safety deposit access logged and sealed. Everything's locked. Timeline? Ready to execute on your word." I deleted the conversation and put the phone away. Looked back out at the parking lot, at Lena's Audi sitting there in the sun. The thing about revenge is that most people do it wrong. They act in anger, make impulsive decisions, leave evidence, create situations where they end up worse off than when they started. But revenge done right isn't about anger, it's about precision, about understanding your opponent completely, about knowing exactly what they want and making sure they never get it. I'd started planning this 6 months ago, right around the time Lena stopped being subtle about her expectations. It was a Saturday, early June. They'd come over to my apartment, the same apartment I'd lived in for 15 years. Small, modest, nothing fancy, but it was paid off and the neighborhood was safe, and I didn't need much space for just me. Lena had looked around with that expression she got sometimes, the one where she was calculating value and coming up short. "You know, Porter, Evan and I were thinking. You're here all alone. This place isn't exactly set up for someone your age. What if something happened?" "I have a medical alert system," I said. Still, it's not ideal. We were thinking maybe you should consider moving, somewhere with staff, people who can check on you." "You mean a facility?" "An active senior community," she corrected. "Somewhere you'd have activities, social interaction, medical care right there if you need it." Evan nodded. "It might be good, Dad. You'd have company." "And this apartment?" I asked. Lena's smile was bright, helpful. "We could help you sell it. The market's good right now. You'd get a decent price, and the equity could help pay for the community." "I see. We're just thinking about your future, making sure you're taken care of." That's when I knew. Not suspected. Knew. because an active senior community wouldn't cost nearly as much as this apartment would sell for. The difference would be substantial, and that difference was what she was really after. Test the old man. Get him moved. Control the asset. Wait for the inevitable. After they left, I sat in my living room for a long time, thinking, planning, running through scenarios. I'd spent 30 years in security. I knew how to gather information, knew how to build cases, knew how to document evidence in ways that would hold up under scrutiny, so I started gathering bank statements, property records, emails, text messages. I created folders, built timelines, tracked every request for money, every suggestion about my health, every casual comment about inheritance and estate planning. And then I went to see Ruth Calder. Ruth had been my attorney for 23 years. She'd handled my divorce, helped me set up my retirement accounts, filed my taxes. She was 60 years old, sharp as broken glass, and she didn't miss anything. I laid it all out for her, showed her the timeline, the pattern, the escalation. She looked at the documents for a long time, then she looked at me. "You're sure about this?" "Completely." "It's your son, Porter." "I know who it is." She nodded. "Okay, then let's make sure everything is protected." We spent 3 months restructuring everything, creating trusts, establishing controls, building legal walls that looked like normal estate planning but were actually something much more precise. The beauty of it was that none of it looked unusual. None of it would raise red flags. It was just a responsible retired man making sure his affairs were in order. Lena had no idea. Why would she? She wasn't included in legal meetings, wasn't copied on attorney emails. She just knew that Porter was getting older and that eventually, inevitably, everything would pass to Evan. Except it wouldn't, not the way she thought. The second piece of the plan came together when I went to see Dr. Patricia Emerson. She was a specialist Mark had recommended, someone who understood complex medical situations and wasn't afraid to think creatively. I explained what I needed. She listened without interrupting. When I finished, she was quiet for almost a minute. "You understand the risks," she finally said. "I do." "And you're certain this is necessary?" "Yes," she nodded. "Then we'll need to be very careful about timing." We spent 2 months preparing, running tests, establishing baselines, creating a medical profile that would support what needed to happen without raising questions. The medication she prescribed was specialized. It would temporarily affect liver function and create lymphatic markers that could easily be misinterpreted by someone who wasn't looking carefully, someone who was expecting to find cancer. It would be uncomfortable. I'd feel genuinely sick, but it would be temporary and reversible. The hardest part was maintaining the deception at home, acting weaker than I felt, letting Lena see what she wanted to see, making Evan believe his father was declining naturally. I started forgetting things, little things, where I'd put my keys, what day it was, names of people I'd known for years. Lena noticed immediately, started making comments about it, started suggesting maybe I should see a doctor. When I finally agreed, she was the one who found Dr. Mills, recommended him specifically, said he was excellent, highly rated. What she didn't know was that I'd already vetted him, already knew his background, knew his tendencies, knew he was competent but not exceptional, knew he'd run the standard tests and reach the obvious conclusion without digging deeper, knew he'd give me exactly the diagnosis I needed him to give. A nurse walked past the waiting area, and I straightened in the wheelchair slightly, adjusted my posture, made myself look smaller, more defeated. The performance had to continue, right up until the end. My phone buzzed again. This time it was Ruth. "Conference room reserved for tomorrow, 2 p.m. Hospital staff coordinated. All parties will be present." Tomorrow. 24 hours from now. I looked back out at the parking lot, at Lena's car still sitting there in the sun. Tomorrow she'd drive home thinking everything was settled, thinking 3 days meant 3 days, thinking her whispered confession was safe because people like me don't push back once they're written off. She was wrong on every point. I thought about all the small moments that had led here, the casual cruelties, the dismissive glances, the way she smiled when talking about my future as if I wasn't in the room, as if I'd already stopped being a person and turned into nothing more than an obstacle between her and what she wanted. There was the time she brought interior decorators to my apartment. Didn't ask, just showed up with them one afternoon, started measuring rooms, talking about staging, about maximizing appeal to potential buyers. I was sitting right there in my chair, and she waved a hand around like I was part of the decor. "We'll need to clear out most of this," she'd told them. "This dated look doesn't sell well. We want it to feel modern, fresh, like someone young could picture themselves here." Dated look. My home of 15 years reduced to something that needed to be wiped clean. Or the dinner party where she introduced me to her colleagues as Evan's father who used to work in security. Used to. Like my entire career was a finished curiosity, something archived and irrelevant. One of her friends asked what I did now. "Oh, Porter's retired," Lena answered before I could speak. "He's enjoying the simple life. Aren't you, Porter? No pressure, no responsibility. Just taking it easy." She made it sound generous, like she'd granted me permission to fade into the background. And then there were the phone calls I overheard. The ones she assumed I couldn't hear because I was resting in my chair. Calls to her mother, to her friends, casual conversations about timelines and inheritances and how much longer this phase might last. "He's 61, not 90, she said once. "But he looks worn down, all that stress from his job. I'd give it 2 years, maybe 3. Then we can finally focus on our future." 2 years, maybe 3. She'd actually calculated it, had a countdown for my disappearance like it was a project milestone. I'd sat there in my chair, eyes closed, breathing steady, and listened to her plan my exit from the world. Listened to her turn my mortality into a financial strategy. That's when I'd known that quiet resistance wasn't enough, that protecting my assets in a standard will wouldn't be sufficient. She'd find ways around that, would manipulate Evan, would create narratives, would position herself as the grieving daughter-in-law who'd sacrificed so much to care for me in my final years. No, I needed something more permanent, more absolute. Something she couldn't talk her way around or lawyer her way through. I needed the truth to be undeniable. The waiting area was getting warmer as the afternoon sun came through the windows. I could feel it on my face, could see dust motes floating in the light, could hear the distant sound of a television from someone's room down the hall. Everything felt very clear, very sharp, like the world had come into focus after months of deliberate blurring. Tomorrow at 2 p.m., that clarity would become everyone else's reality too. My home office was exactly where I'd left it. Small room off the living room in my apartment, desk I'd bought at an estate sale 12 years ago, file cabinet that had seen better days, corkboard on the wall with photos and notes that probably looked random to anyone else, but there was nothing random about it. Every piece of paper, every photograph, every note. They were all part of the map I'd been building. I wasn't in the office now. I was still in the hospital bed, pretending to sleep while Lena and Evan talked in hushed voices outside my room. But I could see it in my mind. Could picture every document in its proper place. Top drawer, financial records. Not the obvious ones, the deep ones. Property assessments, investment statements, account numbers for things Lena didn't know existed. I'd been careful about money for 30 years. Careful about not keeping everything in one place. Careful about creating layers. The investment portfolio alone would have surprised her. She thought I lived on a security officer's pension and Social Security. Modest income, nothing special. What she didn't know was that I'd been investing since I was 25. Had learned early that compound interest was the closest thing to magic that existed in the real world. 36 years of consistent contributions, of living below my means, of ignoring the new car temptation and the bigger apartment temptation and all the other little temptations that drain people dry. The result was a portfolio that would have made Lena's eyes go wide if she'd ever seen the statements. Almost $2 million in various accounts. Index funds, bonds, some individual stocks and companies I'd researched carefully. Nothing flashy, nothing risky, just steady, patient growth over decades. She'd never asked about it, never wondered how I could afford to give Evan $20,000 for his house down payment without blinking. Never questioned how I could live comfortably in retirement without appearing to worry about money. She'd just assumed I was living close to the edge. Assumed that the apartment and whatever was in my checking account was the sum total of everything. Because that's what she wanted to assume, because it fit her narrative. Second drawer, correspondence. Emails printed out, text message logs, recorded phone conversations, all legal, all documented, all time-stamped. Lena asking about the apartment value, Lena suggesting I update my will, Lena mentioning how much she worried about my health. I'd printed every single message, organized them chronologically, created a paper trail that told a story even someone who wanted to deny it couldn't argue with. There was the email from 8 months ago where she'd sent me links to senior living facilities. Just thinking ahead, she'd written, want to make sure you have options when the time comes. When the time comes. Not if, when. There was the text message where she'd asked if I'd considered what would happen to my things after I was gone. My things. Like my entire life could be sorted into boxes and donated to Goodwill. There were the voicemails, dozens of them. Her voice always bright and helpful, always positioned as concern. But the subtext was clear if you knew how to listen. Just checking in, Porter. Wanted to make sure you're taking your medications. I worry about you being alone. What if something happened and nobody knew? Maybe we should set up a daily check-in system. Translation. I need to know your condition at all times. Need to track your decline. Need to know when to start the countdown. Third drawer, legal documents. The real ones. Not the copies I'd shown Evan and Lena. The actual trust documents that Ruth had prepared. The power of attorney limitations. The beneficiary structures that would activate under specific conditions. Ruth had been brilliant in how she'd structured everything. The trust was technically irrevocable, but I maintained control during my lifetime. Could live in my apartment, could access my accounts, could make decisions about my own care. But the moment I passed, everything locked. And the keys to that lock weren't based on simple inheritance. They were based on conditions. Specific, measurable, documented conditions. Evan would need to demonstrate financial independence for a period of 2 years. Would need to show that his decisions were his own. Would need to prove that he wasn't under anyone's undue influence. The trust document defined undue influence very carefully, very specifically, and almost every criterion matched something Lena had done or said in the past 18 months. It was legal poetry. Careful, precise, unbreakable. Fourth drawer, medical records, both sets. Dr. Mill's file showing the cancer diagnosis, Dr. Emerson's file showing exactly what was really happening to my body and why. Dr. Emerson had been cautious at first. When I'd explained what I wanted to do, she'd gone very quiet, had asked me to repeat myself to make sure she'd heard correctly. You want me to prescribe medication that will temporarily make you appear seriously ill, she'd said, so that another doctor will misdiagnose you with terminal cancer, so that your family will reveal their true intentions? Yes? That's incredibly risky, Porter, not just medically, legally, ethically. I know. And you're certain this is the only way? I'd shown her the evidence then, the emails, the texts, the recorded conversations, the timeline of Lena's growing fixation on when I would no longer be around. She'd read through everything twice, then she'd looked at me with different eyes. How long have you been planning this? 4 months. And your attorney knows? She's the one who suggested I document everything. Dr. Emerson had nodded slowly. Okay, if we're going to do this, we do it right. Full medical monitoring, regular check-ins. The moment anything looks wrong, we stop. Agreed. And you understand that I'll need to document the real diagnosis somewhere, for liability purposes. It won't be in the hospital system, but it needs to exist. I understand. We'd spent 2 months preparing. The medication was something used to treat a rare autoimmune condition. In controlled doses, it was beneficial. In the doses we were using, it created specific markers that looked very much like advanced cancer to someone who wasn't looking for alternative explanations. My liver enzymes had climbed. My lymph nodes had swollen. I'd lost weight. Had felt genuinely terrible. But it was all reversible. All temporary. All part of the plan. And in the locked bottom drawer, behind a false panel I'd installed myself, the contingency documents. The things that would only come out if everything else failed. These were the insurance policy. The recordings I'd made without telling anyone. The photographs I'd taken. The evidence that went beyond just financial manipulation and into territory that would make even a sympathetic jury turn against Lena. I'd installed a small camera in my apartment, hidden in a bookshelf. Nothing obvious. Nothing Lena would notice. But it captured everything that happened in my living room, including the afternoon she'd brought someone over while I was supposedly napping in my bedroom, a real estate agent. They'd walked through my apartment, the agent taking photos, Lena pointing out features, both of them talking like I was already gone. The location is excellent, the agent had said. And with some updates, this could sell for quite a bit. When are you thinking of listing? Soon, Lena had answered. Very soon, maybe a month, 2 at most. This was 3 months ago, before the diagnosis, before the hospital. She'd already been making plans, already been preparing to sell my home while I was still living in it. The camera had captured all of it, the measurements, the photos, the discussion of asking price. Lena's smile when the agent mentioned the number. That footage was my nuclear option. If the trust somehow failed, if Lena found a legal crack, if anything went wrong with tomorrow's reveal. I had that evidence ready to deploy. But I didn't think I'd need it. Ruth had been too thorough, the trust was too well constructed, and tomorrow's revelation would be too devastating. The door to my hospital room opened. Lena came in alone. Evan must have finally gone home to shower, change clothes, pretend life was normal for a few hours. Porter? She moved quietly to my bedside. Are you awake? I let my eyes open slowly, blinked like I was confused about where I was. Sorry, she said softly. I didn't mean to wake you. I just wanted to check on you. What time is it? Almost 6. Evening. She pulled a chair close to the bed, sat down, crossed her legs. Evan went home for a bit. He'll be back later. Okay. We sat in silence for a moment. I could hear the IV drip, the ventilation system, distant voices in the hallway. I was thinking, Lena said carefully, about arrangements, about what happens next. Next? After. When you're not here anymore. She reached out and took my hand. Her fingers were cold as always. I want to make sure we honor your wishes. Do things the way you would want. I appreciate that. Do you have preferences? For the service? For where you'd want to be? She paused. Laid to rest? I studied her face. She was good, really good. The concern looked genuine. The sadness in her eyes could have fooled anyone who didn't know better. Something simple, I said. Nothing fancy. Of course, simple. She squeezed my hand. And your affairs? Your finances? I know this is hard to talk about, but Evan and I want to make sure everything is handled properly. We don't want any confusion later. Ruth has everything. Something flickered across her face, just for a second. Your attorney? Yes, all the documents, all the instructions. That's good. That's very organized. She smiled. Will we need to meet with her? Go over everything? She'll contact you when it's time. When it's time, Lena repeated. Right, of course. She stayed for another 10 minutes, made small talk about the weather, about hospital food, about how brave I was being. Then she kissed my forehead and left. I watched the door close and counted to 30. Then I reached for my phone. Mark answered on the first ring. How's the performance going? He asked. She's already asking about finances. Subtle as ever. Is the cafe meeting still on for tomorrow morning? 9 a.m. Ruth will be there. Good. I need final confirmation on the bank structures. Everything's locked, Porter. Has been for 2 weeks. But if you want another review, I'll make it happen. I want another review. He was quiet for a moment. You're really doing this? Yes. No regrets? None. Okay then. 9 a.m. I'll meet you at the parking garage entrance at 8:30. We'll make sure nobody sees you leave. After I hung up, I lay back and stared at the ceiling again. Counted the tiles again. Let my mind walk through tomorrow's timeline one more time. 8:30. Mark picks me up from the service entrance. Nobody watching that door. Nobody expecting the terminal patient to go anywhere. 9 a.m. Meeting with Ruth at the cafe 3 blocks from the courthouse. Final review of everything. Last chance to make adjustments. 10:30. Back to hospital. Resume position. Resume performance. 2 p.m. The conference room. The final stage. The reveal. Everything I'd built over 6 months would either work or it wouldn't. Either the legal structures would hold or they'd find some crack. Either the medical truth would be believed or it wouldn't. But I'd been thorough. Obsessively thorough. I'd checked every angle. Covered every gap. Anticipated every question. And I'd had help. That was the key. I hadn't tried to do this alone. I'd brought in people I trusted. People who knew their jobs. People who understood that precision mattered more than speed. The hospital room was getting dark. The sun had set while I was thinking. I could see lights in the parking lot below, could see cars pulling out, people going home to their lives, their families, their normal problems that didn't involve betrayal and staged medical emergencies. My phone buzzed one more time. Ruth. Conference room confirmed. Hospital administrator approved the meeting. Dr. Mills will be present to clarify medical situation. All legal parties will be required to attend. Required to attend. That was Ruth's way of saying Lena and Evan wouldn't have a choice, wouldn't be able to avoid what was coming. I texted back. Understood. Then I closed my eyes and let myself actually rest. Tomorrow would be long. Tomorrow would require focus. Tomorrow would be the day 18 months of patience finally paid off. And Lena would learn what happens when you celebrate too early. The parking garage at 8:30 in the morning was colder than I expected. Mark's truck was idling near the service entrance, exactly where he said it would be. I'd gotten dressed slowly in my room, timing it for when the nurses were doing shift change. Nobody to notice, nobody to ask questions. Mark opened the passenger door as I approached. You look terrible. That's the point. He pulled out into traffic. Ruth's already at the cafe. She's got everything with her. Everything? Everything. 3 copies of each document. All originals in the safe deposit box. She even brought backup files on encrypted drives. The cafe was small. Old school. the kind of place that had been serving coffee and toast since before Starbucks existed. Ruth was in a corner booth with a briefcase and black coffee. She looked up when we walked in, nodded once. Mark stayed at the counter. I slid into the booth across from Ruth. "You're sure about this?" she asked. "I'm sure." Last chance to stop it. "I don't want to stop it." She opened the briefcase and pulled out a folder. "The trust structure activates the moment you're declared medically stable, which according to Dr. Emerson's report, you will be as of noon today." "What about Mills?" "Dr. Mills will be informed of the discrepancy. He'll be embarrassed, but not liable. The hospital will find that his interpretation was reasonable given the limited information he had access to." "And the financial controls?" Ruth pulled out another folder. "The trust currently holds all property assets: the apartment, the retirement accounts, the life insurance policies, the investment portfolios, everything." "And Evan's name?" "Was removed as primary beneficiary 6 months ago. Current structure has him as contingent beneficiary only, subject to trust terms. Which are that he maintains financial independence, demonstrates responsible decision-making, and remains free of undue influence." I smiled. "Define undue influence." "Someone who has demonstrated a pattern of financial manipulation. Someone who has made demonstrably false claims about another person's mental capacity. Someone who has explicitly celebrated another person's anticipated passing for financial gain." "And if that person is married to Evan?" "Then Evan gets nothing until the trust administrator is satisfied that he's acting in his own genuine interest and not under someone else's control." Mark brought coffee over, set it down without a word, went back to the counter. "The recordings," I said, "are they admissible?" "In a civil proceeding?" "Absolutely. You were a party to every conversation, you disclosed the recording to me as your attorney, they're time-stamped and unedited, and they demonstrate clear intent on her part." We went through the rest of the documents. The power of attorney limitations that prevented Evan from making decisions on my behalf without court approval. The advance directives that specified exactly who could access my medical information. It took 45 minutes. When we finished, Ruth gathered everything back into the briefcase. 2 p.m., she said. "Conference room 3, everyone will be there." Mark drove me back to the hospital. I went in through the main entrance this time, let people see me shuffling slowly. The performance had to continue just a little longer. Lena was in my room when I got back. She stood up fast when I walked in. "Where were you?" "Walking. Doctor said gentle movement was good." "You should have told someone." She looked worried. But there was something else underneath. Something sharper. "Evan's been looking for you." "I'm fine. Just needed some air." "You need to rest." She guided me back to the bed. Helped me sit. "You have to be careful." I let her settle me in. "There's a meeting this afternoon," I said. "Conference room. 2 p.m.? She went very still. "What kind of meeting?" "Hospital administration wants to talk. About the diagnosis, about next steps." "That's unusual, isn't it?" "I guess they want to make sure everything's clear." She was quiet for a long moment. "Will your attorney be there?" "Ruth?" "Yes." "And Evan and me?" "They said all family should attend." "I see." She sat down, crossed her legs. "We'll be there." Evan showed up at noon with sandwiches. We ate mostly in silence. He tried to make conversation about work, about the weather, about anything except the obvious. At 1:45, a nurse came to get us, said the conference room was ready. Lena touched up her makeup. Evan straightened his shirt. I shuffled along behind the nurse. The conference room was on the second floor. Big table, 8 chairs, windows overlooking the parking lot. Ruth was already there, briefcase open. Dr. Mills was there too, looking uncomfortable, and 2 hospital administrators. We all sat down. Lena next to Evan, Evan next to me, Ruth at the end, Mills and the administrators across from us. The older administrator, Beverly Watson, spoke first. "Thank you all for coming. We've called this meeting to discuss a medical matter that requires clarification. Dr. Mills?" Mills looked uncomfortable. "I want to start by saying that yesterday's consultation was conducted in good faith based on the information available." Lena's hand found Evan's under the table. "However," Mills continued, "it has come to our attention that Mr. Kellor has been under concurrent care with another specialist, Dr. Patricia Emerson, and her findings differ significantly from mine." The room got very quiet. "Differ how?" Evan asked. "I diagnosed Mr. Kellor with advanced liver cancer with lymphatic involvement. Prognosis 72 hours. Dr. Emerson's tests show something quite different." "I don't understand," Lena said. Her voice was careful. Are you saying the cancer isn't advanced? I'm saying there is no cancer. Mills pulled out a folder. The liver enzyme elevation I observed was caused by a prescribed medication. The lymphatic markers were consistent with that same medication's known side effects. When Dr. Emerson provided me with the complete medical history this morning, the picture became clear. So, he's not going to pass away? Evan's voice cracked. Not in 72 hours. No. Lena's face went through several expressions very quickly. Shock, confusion, and then something else. Something that looked almost like anger before she controlled it. That's wonderful, she said. We're so relieved. Indeed, Ruth said quietly. It was the first time she'd spoken. Very relieving. Beverly Watson nodded. Obviously, a misdiagnosis of this magnitude is concerning. We'll be reviewing our protocols. But the important thing is that Mr. Kellor's prognosis is actually quite positive. How positive? I asked. Dr. Mills actually smiled. With proper care and continued treatment, you should have many years ahead of you, Porter. Many years. I watched Lena process that. Watched her try to keep her expression neutral. Watched her fail. That's such good news, Evan said. He was crying. Dad, that's incredible. It is, I agreed. Ruth stood up. If we're clear on the medical situation, I have some legal matters to discuss while we're all here. Beverly Watson looked confused. Legal matters? Estate and Trust Administration. Given the change in Mr. Kellor's health status, certain structures need to be explained to his family. Lena's hand tightened on Evan's. What structures? Ruth opened her briefcase and pulled out folders. She placed one in front of Evan and Lena. One in front of me, kept one for herself. 6 months ago, Mr. Kellor engaged me to restructure his estate. This is standard procedure for someone entering retirement. However, given his family situation, we took some additional precautions. What kind of precautions? Lena asked. Her voice was harder now. Mr. Kellor established an irrevocable trust. All assets, property, accounts, investments are now held by that trust. He retains control during his lifetime. Upon his passing, distribution is determined by the trust terms. And the terms are? Evan asked. Ruth looked at him. That beneficiaries must demonstrate financial independence and freedom from undue influence. What does that mean? It means, Ruth said carefully, that if someone is found to have manipulated, coerced, or unduly influenced a potential beneficiary, that beneficiary receives nothing until they can prove they're acting of their own free will. The room went very quiet. Lena stood up. This is ridiculous. Porter, tell her. I meant every word, I said quietly. She stared at me. You're not even sick. No, I'm not. You lied. This whole thing was a lie. Not the diagnosis. That was real. Dr. Mills genuinely believed what he saw. I just had help creating what he would see. This is fraud, Lena said. Her face was flushed. This is manipulation. Ruth's voice was ice cold. Mr. Kellor can structure his estate however he chooses, and given the evidence of your statements and behavior, the trust terms are entirely justified. What evidence? Would you like me to list it? The multiple requests for financial assistance, the suggestions that Mr. Kellor move to a facility so his apartment could be sold, the discussions about inheritance while he was still very much alive, and most notably, your comment yesterday in his hospital room about how his money would finally be yours. Lena's face went white. I never... You did, I said. I heard you, and it was recorded. You recorded me? I documented everything. Every conversation, every request, every casual comment about my declining health and what it would mean for your financial future. Evan was looking between us. Dad, I don't understand. What's happening, I said, standing up slowly, is that I'm not going anywhere, and everything you both assumed you'd inherit is locked in a trust you'll never access unless you can prove Lena hasn't been controlling you for the past 2 years. That's not fair, Evan said. Fair? You want to talk about fair? My voice was quiet, but there was steel in it now. You let her push me aside. Let her treat me like I was already gone. Let her plan my funeral while I was still breathing. Lena grabbed her purse. We're leaving. This is insane. We'll contest this. You can try, Ruth said, but I should mention that contesting the trust will result in automatic forfeiture of any potential benefit. It's clearly stated in the terms. Challenge the trust, lose everything. You planned this, Lena said, looking at me. You set me up. I protected myself, I corrected. She looked at Evan. Are you going to let him do this? Evan just sat there, frozen. Evan? Lena's voice was sharp now. He didn't answer. She stared at him for a long moment. Then she grabbed her purse and walked out. The door slammed behind her hard enough to rattle the window glass.